Hello, this is Nina Hidalgo of NTH Miniature Arts. Today's video is all about dagger brushes. I've been hearing a lot of good things about this brush, so join me in finding out the truth to it. This video is in partnership with Princeton Artist Brush. We're going to be using their amazing dagger brushes. Let's start with the Neptune series, which is their thirstiest brush. It is synthetic squirrel and most recommended for watercolor. I have here the sizes 1/2, 3/8, and 1/4. Next is the Mini Detailer Dagger 1/4. It is mini synthetic sable and suited for acrylic and watercolor. The Aqua Dagger 3/8 is synthetic Galinsky and good for watercolor and oil. Next up is my favorite, which is the Velvet Touch Dagger Striper 1/4. It is Princeton's finest mixed media brush, which means it can be used for acrylic, watercolor, oil, and gouache. This is Umbria, special synthetic, which I love to use for gouache. It is best for acrylic and watercolor. We have sizes 6, 4, and 2. And last but not the least, the wonderful and affordable Select Artist Dagger 1/4, which is recommended for acrylic, watercolor, and oil. Let's begin with the strokes we can make using the Neptune dagger brushes. I'll be using this Strathmore Mixed Media Visual Journal, which is what I use for daily practice, and Daler-Rowney watercolors. I will be mixing green and brown to make my favorite shade of green, that is called Army Green. This is Neptune 1/4. It's obvious how pointy the tip is, so let's see how thin the strokes we can make. I'm loading the brush with diluted watercolor and gently gliding the tip on the surface of the paper. We need minimal pressure at this point to do the thin lines. You might want to glide your pinky finger as you do the strokes for better control. I'm getting more excited. Let's now check the belly and how thick the stroke we can have. Add more pressure, letting the belly touch the surface of the paper, then gently lift it to make a thick to thin transition. I am doing some slanted lines to make use of that free space. Now, let me reload my brush and make the thickest stroke this size can do. Now that we've seen how cool the strokes are, I'm going to try the bigger sizes. I do miniature paintings, that's why it's overwhelming for me to use big brushes. But these brushes are so good, they just make it easy for me to do anything I want to experiment on. Most of my followers are asking what's the difference between Dagger Striper and the regular dagger. That's a good question. Well, as you can see, the Dagger Striper is much thinner than the regular dagger brush. So if you are working on small areas, I suggest the Dagger Striper because it has thinner belly and pointier tip. But if you are working on a large area, I suggest using the regular dagger brush. Now, let me show you why dagger brush is perfect for botanical painting. We are still using the same watercolor journal and would like to make use of the back of the previous sheet for practice purposes. And we're still using the same watercolor palette. This is Velvet Touch Dagger Striper. I loaded it with diluted watercolor and starting to make a one-stroke leaf. Starting with a thin slanted line, transitioning to thick stroke, making sure that the belly touches the paper, then slowly going back to thin. You can pivot the brush to make the leaves on the other side. So let's do that again. It's fun and easy, right? Let me now show you how to make two-stroke leaf. We are basically doing the same. However, we are going to add more stroke. For the two-stroke leaf, I intentionally making the inner side straight. You won't need to let all the belly touch the paper to do that. Turn the brush to do it again. It's like mirroring the first stroke, but make sure to leave thin white space between. Feel free to rotate either your brush or your paper to make the strokes and positioning of your leaves. The Dagger Striper can give us long and thin leaves, while the regular dagger can make thicker ones. Let's try this Aqua Elite Dagger 3/8. This brush can definitely give us longer leaves as the belly is larger than the first two. You can use any brush of your choice to paint leaves, but isn't it nice to use something that can help you make it easy? I think we've seen enough drills. It's time to paint flowers. I'll be using this Bockingford watercolor called Press Paper 300 GSM, Velvet Touch Dagger Striper 1/4, and the Dollar Brownie watercolor. Dagger brush is perfect for flowers which has pointy petals. That's why I chose Astrantia. We will be using two shades, one light and one darker. Load the brush with the diluted light watercolor, then dip the tip on the diluted dark watercolor. Remember the one-stroke leaf? The petal is the same but longer and thinner. Look at the magic it can do. The finished Astrantia at the left has petals that curve upwards, while the one I am doing has petals that curve downwards. Using our dark watercolor, I am dabbing the center a circular pattern. We are now going to add the receptacle. It is the thickened part of the stem from which the flower organs grow. I also added the stem at this point. And lastly, we'll add random one-stroke leaves. Bachelor's button also has point petals, so let's try to paint it too. We will be using 3 shades of blue and violet. It is basically the same steps we did for Astrantia, but we'll have multiple layers because this flower seems to have a lot of petals. I'll speed up the video a bit. Lastly, one of the most beautiful flowers, carnation. I am using the same palette we use for Astrantia, but they are more intensified, meaning I added more pigment. Load the brush with the light color and dip the tip on the dark color. The angled part of the bristles should be the one touching the paper to make this stroke. Add more petals going outwards. They look like pencil shavings, but more of a flower when put together. Let's add the receptacle followed by the stem and the leaves. Ta-da! You now have an easy and simple watercolor ABC flowers.